So we continue with the revision we've already done in the last video, excretory and endocrine, 10 questions each. We move to nervous system ka 10 questions from the first set. So the first question that we looked on in the nervous system we had given was to distinguish between brain and spinal cord in terms of arrangement of neurons. So this is an expected question because it's been repeated n number of times and examiners like asking it. So remember brain mein the cyton is on the outer side and the axon is towards the inner side. Just remember brain and you do the reverse for spinal cord. So spinal cord mein the cyton will be on the inner side and axon will be on the outer side. When they ask you part of neuron, make sure you don't just write about gray matter, white matter and leave it. You specify cyton and axon. The second one is the definition of a reflex action. So you can use your words like sudden, spontaneous, quick, automatic, involuntary, sudden, spontaneous, involuntary response to a stimulus. Or you can write the other one. It is a sudden, quick, automatic, involuntary response to a stimulus. The third one is drawing of a neuron, which is again a very commonly asked question. So with every diagram, make sure you give the title. So title here would be neuron. You have to draw your cyton. So you draw the cyton. You can either make them as cytoplasmic projections or you can show those hair-like structures. Either will do. Get the structure down like this. You can show the branching nature over here. You can break the nucleus, make the Nissls granules, make the myelin sheath. It's a discontinuous structure. And when you make the myelin sheath, you shade it. Make the myelin sheath, you shade it. Then you can draw the axon endings. You can draw the neurolemma. Draw it continuous. Between the neurolemma and the myelin sheath, you will draw the nucleus. You draw it alternatively like this. You could draw it like this here on one side, then another one here, another one here, and another one here. This entire thing can be labeled as cyton or perikaryon. The branches are dendrons, then the dendrites, the nucleus, the Nissls granules, the shaded part, the myelin sheath, the part of myelin, the part of axon without myelin sheath, node of Ranvier, the outer covering neurolemma, longest dendron axon, and axon endings. Okay, that's your diagram of the neuron. The fourth one that is there is your definition of a synapse. Fourth one, we decided that we see synapse. So if this is one neuron, this is the axon ending of a neuron, and this is the other neuron. These are the dendrites of the neuron. Then this area here is the synapse. So we remember we said that we'll not write point of contact, we'll write junction. It is a junction between two things. One is the axon endings. So this over here is the axon endings of a neuron. And the other is this part over here. So these are dendrites. So junction between the axon endings of a neuron and the dendrites of another, which is separated by a fine gap. So there is a gap which is present in between, and that gap is called as synaptic cleft. But in the name the following question, if it comes as point of contact between two neurons, then you write it as synapse. So synapse is defined as the junction between the axon endings of a neuron and the dendrites of another, separated by a fine gap called synaptic cleft. Remember, the neurotransmitters are stored in the axon endings. Example of the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, and it helps in transmission of nerve impulses across the synapse. The fifth question that we had seen for the day was, what was that? The function of medulla oblongata. So medulla oblongata ke function mein, we will write it controls the involuntary actions. And with writing controlling the involuntary actions, we will always give an example. So we could give an example that it controls heartbeat. Or we could give an example that it controls peristalsis. Or we could give an example of breathing, no problem. इसी के basis पे they can ask you that give reason medulla co-injury leads to death of the individual. The sixth one we had given was effect of sympathetic nervous system on salivation and pupil of the eye. So salivation pe what is the impact of the sympathetic nervous system, and pupil of the eye pe what is the impact. So your mouth turns dry basically in cases of emergency. So salivation is inhibited by the sympathetic nervous system. And when you look at something that is, you stare at it in disbelief rather. So you remember the pupil will dilate under sympathetic nervous system. So dilation of pupil is caused by sympathetic nervous system. It's one of the true or false question which was asked in boards also. Dilation of pupil is brought about by sympathetic nervous system. Dilation is increase in diameter. The other reason or the other point where dilation you could think of is in dark. So in dark, what happens is more light should enter for image formation. So the pupil will dilate. The seventh one we had seen was, the seventh question we had put on was the components of a reflex arc, ARC. So if they ask you phenomenon, it will be action. If they ask you pathway, it will be reflex arc. So reflex arc definition is shortest pathway that an impulse can take from a receptor to an effector. So we know that it can start from a receptor, and after the receptor, the next structure could be the sensory neuron. Remember, it's not the nerve, it is the neuron. The sensory neuron could also be called as the afferent neuron, AFFERENT. The afferent of the sensory neuron to the association neuron, which is also called as the interneuron, which is also called as the relay neuron. Then it would go to the motor neuron. The motor neuron would also be the efferent neuron. And following the motor neuron, it would be the effector, which could either be a muscle or it could be a gland. So it's basically receptor se effector taka shortest distance. And the question we had was components of a reflex arc. So they could be asking you as a logical sequence. So this is the sequence. The eighth question we did was, we had written for today from nervous, was function and location of CSF. So cerebrospinal fluid basically expanded. There could be multiple locations. You could write ventricles of the brain as one location. Apart from ventricles of the brain, you could write central canal of the spinal cord as the other location. Apart from the central canal of the spinal cord, you could write surrounding the brain in between the layers of the meninges. So between the meninges, between the layers of the meninges surrounding the brain, between the layers of the meninges which are surrounding the brain. So these are a few locations that you could write for cerebrospinal fluid. Then you have the function. So the function would be, it would act like a shock absorber. So acting like a shock absorber, or rather the better way is to write it as, okay, the better way to write it is that it acts like, or it basically, what does it do? It protects the brain from mechanical jerks and shocks. Okay, so it protects the brain from, what does it protect the brain? It protects the brain from mechanical jerks and shocks. So mechanical jerks and shocks. Instead of writing acting as a shock absorber, it protects the brain from mechanical jerks and shocks. It also helps in exchange of substances like nutrients and oxygen from the surface of the brain to the outside, but most preferred is this one, protecting the brain from mechanical jerks and shocks. It's easier to remember. Then you had the location and function of myelin sheath. The ninth question we had put on for today was the location and function of the myelin sheath. So we know myelin sheath is basically your insulator. This was the axon and this is the myelin sheath. Okay, so this myelin sheath that is present on the axon or surrounding the axon. So location could be surrounding the axon. There are two functions. Remember, it acts like an insulator, as I said. Insulator is something that does not allow the escape. So here it does not allow the message to move out. So basically it prevents intermixing of impulses. It prevents intermixing of impulses. So preventing the intermixing of impulses. And because it is acting like an insulator, so it acts like an insulator, preventing the intermixing of impulses. That is first function. And second function is faster transmission of nerve impulse. If the myelin sheath is present, then the message is going faster. So faster transmission of nerve impulses is taking place if the myelin sheath is present. And intermixing of impulses is being prevented. It's acting as an insulator. The 10th function or the 10th question that we had written from nervous system, which was last from this set for today, was the function of the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus ka function is basically borrowed from grade 9. So what does it do? It helps to maintain normal body temperature. It helps to regulate normal body temperature. Regulating normal body temperature. And the second function you can remember with hypothalamus is the one associated with endocrine, right? It controls the working of the pituitary gland. It also helps to control the working of the pituitary gland, because the pituitary hormones, the posterior pituitary hormones, actually are produced in the hypothalamus and only released from the posterior pituitary. You can just write controls the working of the pituitary gland and regulates normal body temperature. Okay, so that was the first, okay, that was the nervous system set that we had given, and moving on to the sense organ set that we have for today. So from the chapter of sense organs, the 10 questions that we have for today. First one was a diagram showing correction of myopia. So myopia correction. So myopia ka correction. We know that myopia ka correction is concave lens. So first you make sure you give your title, which is myopia correction. Then you draw the outline of your eye. So this is the protruding part. And you can draw the optic nerve like this. This could be the optic nerve. This could be the lens here. Myopia correction is concave lens. So the lens has to be drawn outside. This is the concave lens. Concave will do what? Concave will diverge. So you bring it till here, in the middle. Use a scale and you diverge it like this. You diverge this from here. After you've diverged, you have to converge it at the center approximately here, which is the yellow spot. So you converge it onto the yellow spot. Make sure you draw your arrowheads. And like this. You have to label this as the concave lens. Okay, that's your correction for myopia. The second one says to define the process of accommodation and give the shape of the lens during near and distant vision. So defining accommodation. So make sure that your definition of accommodation has the following terms. So accommodation is basically the ability of the eye lens. Ability of the eye lens. What does the eye lens do? The eye lens basically alters the focal length. Alters its focal length. And by altering of this focal length, how does the eye get benefited, or how do you get benefited? So that you can view objects at different distances. So you can view objects which are present at different distances, which means you can see things which are far away. You can see things which are close to you also. Okay, so ability of the eye lens to alter its focal length so that you can view objects at different distances is called as accommodation. Again, this is also a board question, and we've seen accommodation itself, the shape of the lens being asked. For a 5 mark ka ek question we have seen. So when you see something that is close to you, as we had revised, when you see something that is closer to you, the lens is thicker. And when you see something that is far away, the lens is pulled and the lens is thinner, or the lens is pulled thin. And when you see something that is close to you, the lens is thicker. So thin for distant vision and thick for near vision, or thicker and thinner. So basically the idea. Then is the third question we had seen was the function of choroid. So sclera, choroid, retina. Yes, choroid ka function, choroid has two functions. One is because choroid is pigmented. Its dark surface will absorb the scattered rays, and these scattered rays which will be absorbed This will be absorbing of the scattered rays. Basically, it will prevent reflection within the eyeball. Okay, so it will prevent the reflection that is taking place within the eyeball. So preventing reflection taking place within the eyeball. Or the second function is nourishment. Nourishes the inner layers of the eye through its blood supply. Okay, pigment, because it has blood supply, it can nourish the inner layers of the eye. The fourth question we picked on was the yellow spot location. So if you remember the yellow spot location, it is at the center of the retina. So yellow spot is basically center of the retina. And center of the retina where the horizontal axis of the eye meets it. Center of the retina where the horizontal axis of the eye meets it is the location. So center of the retina where the horizontal axis of the eye meets it is the location of the yellow spot where maximum cone cells are present. The fifth question that we had picked on from sense organs from this set was to distinguish between rods and cones on the basis of pigment. If you remember, I taught you rods mein D aata hai, so it is active in dim light, and cones mein we had discussed ki cone starts with C, so it is basically concerned with color perception. So rods का जो pigment होता है वो होता है rhodopsin. Rhodopsin का alternative name होता है visual purple. So rhodopsin, visual purple. And cones का जो pigment होता है that we will write as iodopsin. So rhodopsin and iodopsin. Make sure you get your spellings correct. The sixth one that we had discussed for today was organ of quartile location and function. Okay, I hope you've kept the questions open. The organ of quartile ka location and function. So organ of quartile का जो function है वही cochlea का भी function है. So it helps to convert the sound vibrations to nerve impulses. Sound vibrations को convert करता है nerve impulses में. And location, we remember it is on the basilar membrane in the median canal of the cochlea in the inner ear. If you need the diagram, please refer to the notes we've written in class. So it is present on the basilar membrane. I'm so sorry. Let me erase this one. That's it. Okay, not going. I'll just cancel. On the basilar membrane, which canal of the cochlea? So it is on the basilar membrane in the median canal of the cochlea. In the median canal of the cochlea in the inner ear. Please write the entire thing. Okay. On the basilar membrane in the median canal of the cochlea in the inner ear is the function, is the location of organ of quartile, whose function is to convert the sound vibrations to nerve impulses. The seventh question that we had put up was to draw the diagram of the inner ear. So instead of directly asking you inner ear, they can ask you to draw the membranous labyrinth. Membranous labyrinth. Membranous labyrinth is nothing but the inner ear ka diagram that they will ask you. So if you see the membranous labyrinth ka diagram, so you can have the cochlea like this. And from here, you first draw the first semicircular canal. This is the ampulla. You draw it going behind like this. Coming ahead, you draw the second इसी का closed version. The second semicircular canal will start from between here. You draw it like this. You take it a little ahead, draw it straight like this. Make इसका semicircular canal का ampulla. This is इसका ampulla. You close it. Next वाले का ampulla will start in between this. So here and here, and you draw this, and you close this. You close this. Get this here. Get this here. You close this structure. Draw the oval window, the round window. If you want the utriculus, the sacculus, a few fibers of the auditory nerve coming from here, a few coming from here, and a few coming from here. You just draw it like this. This will be your auditory nerve. Okay, or any similar diagram that we may have drawn in class. So this is your semicircular canal. This is ampulla. This is oval window. This is round window. This is the cochlea. This is the auditory nerve. This upper circle is utriculus and the lower one is sacculus. Okay. So this is your diagram for membranous labyrinth or inner ear. The eighth question that we have was eustachian tube location and function. Eustachian tube ka location and function. So eustachian tube ka location is connecting the cavity of the middle ear to the throat. Cavity of the middle ear to the throat. So middle ear to throat, or middle ear to pharynx I prefer, but if you can't remember the word, you can write cavity of middle ear to throat. And the function is to equalize. So what does it equalize? It equalizes air pressure. Then you have to talk about where. So it has to equalize air pressure on either side of the tympanum. Either side of the tympanum. Tympanum is your eardrum. So equalizes air pressure on either side of the tympanum. When it does so, what happens? So equalizes air pressure on either side of the tympanum so that it can vibrate freely. That becomes the function. The give reason we will see in another set. Middle ear infections wala give reason we will see in another set. Vitreous humor ka location and function. So this is the lens. This over here is the cornea. This is cornea, this is lens, and this is retina. Between the lens and the cornea is aqueous humor, and between the lens and the retina is vitreous humor. So vitreous humor ka L stands for location. It is in the posterior chamber of the eyeball, and it is in between the lens on one side and the retina on the other. So in the posterior chamber of the eyeball, between the lens and the retina is the location of the vitreous humor. Function of the vitreous humor. So the function of vitreous humor is shape, giving shape to the eyeball. Second function is to protect the nerve endings in the retina. So protecting the retinal nerve endings. Protecting the retinal nerve endings. To protect the nerve endings in the retina is the function. Okay. The 10th one says function of tears. So tears ka function is to lubricate the surface of the eye, but you can remember that it contains an antibacterial substance. That antibacterial substance is called lysozyme, Lysozyme. This lysozyme is antibacterial. Or you can simply write lubricates the surface of the eye. Okay, so these were the 10 questions from sense organs. Fair enough. This is where we will stop for this one.